I grew up in a small town in Maryland, in a rural area of the state, and we were the only Greeks in town. We ran this restaurant, or one of a handful of Greeks, I guess. So I grew up, in a sense, in a different environment or context than a lot of Greek Americans who grew up in urban areas where there was more of a community. I mean, the nearest Greek Orthodox church to where we lived was 100 miles away. And so maybe once a month, you know, my mother would pack us all into the car. We would drive 100 miles in order to go to church. Well, my father came at 15, but he became fluent in English. And you know these stories they tell about the restaurant owner who would then go home and read Plato and Aristotle. Well, my father actually did that. I mean, he had these books at home of the classics, and he knew that. And actually, a lot of that generation of Greeks had that dimension to them. They had certain values within their own culture that were important to succeeding in American society. They had strong family ties, which created a strong support system, of a fierce belief in education. I remember once when I was in high school and I sort of said to my father, well, I'm not going to go to college. He rarely would get angry with me, but he sort of shook me and he said, you're going to go to college. He says, you may grow up to be a good for nothing, but you're going to be an educated good for nothing. So there was this fierce commitment to education, hard work, which has characterized our community, I think, in this country, and of course a strong religious faith, because the church has played, I think, an important role.
My father, he don't have the money to put me in a school over Greece, all right, to do something very easy, more easy. So I'm working very hard.
Όταν γίνηκε δικηγόρος η αδελφή μου, εδώ στο Baltimore, ήταν 12 γυναίκες δικηγόροι. Μόνο 12, back in 1960. Ο παππούς μου ήταν δικηγόρος και ο great-grandfather ήταν δικηγόρος στην Ελλάδα. Ο πάππους μου είχε διώξει το Τούρκο στα Δωδεκάνησα. Τον έβαλε στη βάρκα, του είπε να φύγει και τον έφερανε στη Κωνσταντινούπολη, ο μεγάλος Τούρκος, και they were going to kill him. But when he spoke to him, it's a true story. Τον άφησε και γύρισε. He went back to the Dodekanisek and he became sort of an official for the Carpathians, Rodites, and so on, with the Turks.
I was the first Greek American ever elected to the United States Senate. Subsequently, Paul Tsongas came to the Senate, and Olympia Snow came to the Senate, and Olympia still serves in the United States Senate. Of course, John Bradamus was the real path breaker for us because he was elected in 1958 to the House of Representatives. And that was a real breakthrough for our community. Subsequently, others followed him into the House, and I was one who came into the House, and I was elected in 1970. That was difficult as far as dealing with the Greek issues, because Greece at the time was in the control of the junta, and I was very much opposed to the junta. In fact, neither Bradamus or I would visit Greece during the time of the junta. We did all we could to oppose it here, including opposing American aid, military aid for Greece, because we thought it would go to strengthen the colonels and increase their control over the country.
The statistic is that of all the ethnic groups in this country, we have the highest percentage where in one generation you have young people graduating from college. In other words, we have the first generation, and then immediately thereafter their children attain a college education, the highest percentage of any ethnic group. Greeks have a certain sense of competition, but they also perceived very quickly that education was the ladder to greater opportunity. So, you know, my grandfather, who came here, was not a formally educated man, but was a very smart man. And while he was working in a restaurant, he perceived immediately that the best opportunities in America would come if you could get a good education. So that became then the premium for him in terms of his children. And I think that's why we moved so quickly up the ranks, because we recognized that America was a place where if you applied yourself, if you worked hard, and you seized on educational opportunity and always preserved that drive for excellence, that you could achieve anything.
This is considered the gateway to Greektown from downtown Baltimore. What we have here was a large white wall, and the city, through an office called the Baltimore Office of Promotion and Arts, gave money to do the largest mural in Baltimore's history. Well, the purpose of rejuvenating the area is multifaceted. You can look at it as an economic development initiative to bring money back into the city, but you can also look at it as to bring people, homeowners, back into the community, to bring pride back into the community. It's not necessarily that it's gone, but it's, this effort is to strengthen that existing pride. We decided, they formed the committee, and we decided to have a parade that would incorporate all the cultures of Southeast Baltimore, because we have a huge mix of Italians, Polish, Greek, Latino, African American. But when you enter the Greektown side, you're going to see a heavy artistic Greek influence. I remember, I'm 28 years old. I was born in 1981, so when my parents moved out, I was 4 or 5 years old. I went to the county, so I would come every weekend. I do remember it as a lot of Greek ladies washing their steps. They still do, taking pride, washing their marble steps. I noticed a lot of the men outside taking care of their lawns. I noticed a lot of people out. I noticed that the Greeks who live in their house take very good care of their properties, very good care. And we still have a strong concentration of Greeks in Greektown. Now it's more on the southeast portion. And you can see, I think that that's the strongest portion. It's because of all the Aya and the Bapu that sit there and they scrub the steps and they take care of the garden. It's pride. They have a lot of pride in the community. What we're hoping now is to bring that same pride to not just the young Greeks who moved back in, but to the whites, the Latinos, the African Americans who are in the community. And it's a contagious feeling. The element when we were in our height, I think it's still there. I think there's still a good portion of it. It's not as vibrant as it used to be as far as when Greeks were here. But again, it's never too late to bring it back. The majority of Greektown in the 1950s and 60s, it was originally Polish and German. It was the Greeks that migrated, I'd say in the 30s and 40s through jobs through the port of Baltimore. And a lot of them started buying homes here. So during the 50s and 60s and 70s, it was very, very Greek. It was only until, I'd say, the 1980s, the second generation, the sons of the immigrants who moved over, moved out to the county. I'm the offspring of that second generation. I'm the third generation who moved out to the county. Now, the thing about the Greeks is that they never sell any property. They kept the property here. So that's a good thing and a bad thing. Good because they keep it, they take pride, you know the owners, but it's not as good when you don't have home ownership. So I think we went through, the trouble that we went through was normally with lack of home owners. And that was probably in the late 80s, 90s, when it wasn't at its prime. Now, since our office got involved, you're seeing a lot of people move back into the neighborhood. I'm an example of that. I'm a third generation Greek that moved back in, and my vision is to help bring them together and kind of capitalize on that movement of young people coming in.
I represented unions because I thought the unions were on the right track and I wanted to be part of that move. Through strong unionism in America, that was how the workers in America, the broader group of Americans, got economic fairness. Only that way, through the unions. They were the soldiers in the front, the union people. So I represented the steel workers, I represented the building and construction workers, and retail workers, and so on. I was always concerned about the fact that in America, despite all of the claims that we make as a country, that the opportunities for Americans, while plenty, were always very difficult. Well, they weren't easy. You had to work hard. You had to work too many hours. You didn't get paid enough money. So my sympathy was with the working person. Without the legal system that we have and free practicing lawyers, free meaning lawyers who can choose to take any case that they feel they want to litigate, that is one of the best protections that any citizen of any country can have, and I'm pleased that we have that in the United States. First, we put up all the expenses to litigate the case because the average person couldn't possibly afford to try a case like this because of the tremendous expense in pulling it all together. You have to have experts and so on. The answer is it's a contingency fee case. And that's a big thing in this country, which allows all Americans to have access to lawyers of strong abilities without having to somehow pay them by the hour. That's in America. You can't do that in England and most of the European countries. The powers that be don't want that. They don't want that to happen because if you give every average person a chance to be represented by a competent lawyer when somebody's done them something wrong, then you're going to empower the people. And there's a strong effort in the United States today to curtail lawyers who work like I do with the public. I don't represent any companies. Never represented a company in my life. Not interested. I represent people.
Princeton was trying to reach out and take in more public high school students. And so I applied, they took me, and they gave me financial aid that made it possible to go. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to go. And then while I was at Princeton, I won the Rhodes Scholarship to study at Oxford. So I went to England and to Oxford University, and that's where I met my wife, who's English and was a student at Oxford University. My Greek's not that good. Etsy ketsy. I learned what little Greek I know. I learned from my mother, essentially, who spoke Greek to us at home. And I had no formal schooling in Greek. Unlike my children, all of whom have took Greek at the university level. In fact, they all went to Princeton, and there's a very good modern Greek studies program. Well, they can read and write ancient Greek, in part because their mother was a teacher of ancient Greek, and they can read and write modern Greek because they took this Greek studies program at Princeton.
I certainly feel like my time in Greece helped to strengthen my connection to my Greek heritage. And it helped in terms of solidifying my identity as an individual, as a person. Greek Americans have assimilated very well in this country, you know, and many would argue they have their hands full just attending to the things that are right here in front of them. On the other hand, there are very few Greeks you talk to who have the opportunity to go back to Greece and have seized that, who don't come away from it with this real renewal of who they are.
For any immigrant group, the pressure on them is to succeed in the country to which they've gone. So, and to become part of that country, and there's a lot of pressure in America to do that. And the earlier generations, of course, you had some Greek households where they wouldn't speak Greek in the household because they wanted everyone to speak English and become American. It's a challenge to maintain the ties. I mean, people have very busy lives and a lot of pressure. So if you want to be a good doctor, you got to work very hard at being a good doctor, or a good lawyer, or a good businessman. So you have to add a whole dimension to your life if you're going to sort of try to maintain these ties. And of course, in many families, they don't have relatives any longer in Greece.
Among all the ethnic groups in the United States, the Greeks have one of the highest rates of return to the home country. I remember when I was there in 1985, I was on a Fulbright. My grandmother came over to visit, and we were walking through the village, and this is the village of Elika, which is in the southern Peloponnese near Monovasia. She had not been there at that point for about 30 years, and she became quite agitated, and finally said, there's something missing. We were in a part of the village, she says, there used to be, when I was a little girl,